Are Mondays ever good? Okay, yes, Mondays have. There were Mondays that are good when I work 6 days a week and my off days on Mondays. That was good Mondays. Now that I remember it. Anyway. Anyway, today's reading is not gonna be long. I may or may not read something else if there are people in the stream, but I doubt it. Usually, with people, I don't really have a lot of viewers, so if there are viewers, I will read some other stuff. If there are none, I'll just finish up this and go home. Not go home. Okay, yes. Alright, so we are on the last two chapters of the Tale of Genji, and we're gonna finish it up today, basically. That's what we aim to do. Okay, put up my. Diane's not here today. Diane's busy with IRL stuff. And I'm just gonna do this on my own. That will be fine. Okay. Need lip balm. And after that, we're gonna start. Okay. Anyone who just jumped in, please say hi. Oh yeah, shit. Let me go and hit post on my Discord. Sorry. And Twitter. Alrighty. 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 Let us continue with chapter 11. We are currently reading Murasaki Shikibu's The Tale of Genji, chapter 11, Channel Buoys. Channel Buoys. Channel Buoys. Unable to forget that almost too vivid dream of his father and wanting somehow to lighten the penance, Genji immediately set about a plan for a reading of the Lotus Sutra. It was to be in the 10th month. Everyone at court helped with the arrangements. The spirit of cooperation was as before Genji fell into disfavor. Though seriously ill, Kokiden was still an enemy, angry that she had not succeeded in crushing him completely. The emperor had been convinced that he must pay for the penalty for having gone against his father's wishes. Now that he had Genji recalled, he was in greatly improved spirits, and the eye ailment that had so troubled him had gone quite away. Melancholy forebodings continued to be with him, however. He frequently sent for Genji, who was now in his complete confidence. Everyone thought it splendid that he was at last having his way. The day appointed for his abdication drew near. It grieved him to think of the precarious position in which it would leave Oborozukiyo. "Your father is dead," he said to her, "and my mother is in worse health all the time. I doubt that I have much longer to live and fear that everything will change once I am gone. I know there is someone you have long preferred to me, but it has been a way of mine to concentrate upon one's object, and I have thought only of you. Even if the man whom you prefer does as you wish him to, I doubt that his affection can match my own. The thought is too much for me." He was in tears. She flushed and turned away. An irresistible charm seemed to flow from her to make him forget his grievances. "And why have you not had a child? It seems such a pity. No doubt you will shortly have one by the man with whom you seem to have the stronger bond, and that will scarcely be to my taste. He is a commoner, you know, and I suppose the child must be reared as a commoner." These remarks about the past and about the future so shamed her that she could not bring herself to look at him. He was so handsome, a civil man, and his behavior over the years had told of a deepening affection. And so she had come to understand, as she had become more alive to these subtleties, that Genji, for all his good looks and gallantry, had been less than ideally devoted to her. Why had she surrendered to childish impulses and permitted a scandal which had seriously damaged her name and done no good for his? Thank you for the follow, Android Fox. Thank you. These reminders of the past brought her untold pains. In the second month of the following year, initiation ceremonies were held for the crown prince. He was 11, tall and mature for his age, and the very image of Genji. The world marveled at the almost blinding radiance, but it was a source of great trepidation for Fujitsubo. Very pleased with his successor, the emperor, in a most gentle and friendly way, discussed plans for his own abdication. He abdicated that same month, so suddenly that Kokiden was taken by surprise. "I know that it will be as a person of no importance," he said, seeking to calm her. "But I hope that I will see you rather more frequently and at my leisure." His son, by Lady Shokyoden, was made crown prince. Everything had changed overnight. Causes for rejoicing were innumerable. Genji was made a minister. As the number of ministers is limited by the legal codes, and there were at no time no vacancies, a supernumerary position was created for him. It was assumed that his would be the strongest hand in direction of public affairs. "I am not up to it," he said, deferring to his father-in-law, who was persuaded to come out of retirement and accept appointment as regent. "Hello, Flynn. Thank you for dropping by." "I resigned because of poor health," protested the old man, "and now I am older and even more useless." It was pointed out, however, that in foreign countries, statesmen who in time of civil order have withdrawn to deep mountain retreats have thought it no shame, despite their white beards, to be of service once peace had been restored. Indeed, they have been revered as the true saints and sages. The court and the world at large agreed that there need no be obstacles whatever to resuming upon recovery. Officers resigned because of illness. Unable to persist in his refusal, he was appointed chancellor. He was 63. His retirement had been occasioned in part by the fact that affairs of state were not going as he wished, but now all was in order. His sons, whose careers had been in eclipse, were also brought back. Most striking was the case of Tono Chujo, who was made a supernumerary counselor. He had been especially careful about the training of his daughter, now 12, by Kokiten's sister, and was hoping to send her to court. The boy who had sung Takasago so nicely had come of age and was the sort of son every father wished for. Indeed, Tono Chujo had a troop of sons by his various ladies which quite filled Genji with envy. Genji's own Yugiri was as handsome a boy as any of them. He served as a page for both the emperor and the crown prince. His grandparents, Princess Omiya and the Chancellor, continued to grieve for their daughter, but she was gone and they had Genji's prosperity to take their minds from their sorrow. And it seemed that the gloomy years of Genji's exile had vanished without a trace. Genji's devotion to the family of his late wife was as it had always been. He overlooked no occasion that seemed to call for a visit or for gifts to the nurse and the others who had remained faithful throughout the bad years. One may be sure that there were many happy women among them. At Nijo, too, there were women who awaited his return. He wished to do everything possible to make up for the sorrows that must have been theirs, and upon such women as Chujo and Nakatsukasa, appropriately to their station in life, he bestowed a share of his affection. This left him no time for women outside the house. He had most splendidly remodeled the lodge to the east of his mansion. He had inherited it from his father, and his plans was that it be home for the Lady of the Orange Blossoms and other neglected favorites. I have said nothing about the Akashi lady whom he had left in such uncertainty. Busy with public and private affairs, he had not been able to inquire after her as he would have wished. From about the beginning of the third month, though he told no one, she was much on his mind, and for her time must be approaching, he sent for a messenger, who very soon returned. A girl was safely delivered on the 17th. It was his daughter. He was delighted, but why had he not brought the lady to have her child in the capital? You will have 3 children, a fortune teller had once told him. 2 of them are certain to become emperor and empress. The least of the 3 will become chancellor, the most powerful man in the world. The whole of the oracle seemed by way of coming true. He had consulted physiognomists in large numbers, and they had unanimously in telling him that he would rise to grand heights and have the world to do with as he wished. But through the unhappy days he had dismissed them from his thoughts. With the commencement of the new reign, it seemed that his most extravagant hopes were being realized. The throne itself lay beyond his reach. He had been his father's favorite over his many brothers, but his father had determined to reduce him to common status, and that fact made it apparent that the throne must not be among his ambitions. Although the reasons were of course secret, the accession of the new emperor seems evidence enough that the fortune teller had not deceived him. As for the future prospects, he thought that he could see the god of Sumiyoshi at work. Had it been foreordained that someone from Akashi was meant for remarkable things? Was it for that reason that her eccentric father had what had seemed preposterous plans? Genji had done badly in letting his daughter to be born in a corner of the provinces. He must send for mother and daughter as soon as the proprieties allowed, and he gave orders that the remodeling of the East Lodge be hurried. Water. Capable nurses would be difficult to find, he was afraid, in Nakashi. He remembered having heard the sad story of a woman whose mother had been among the old emperor's private secretaries, and whose father, had been a chamberlain and counselor. The parents both dead, and the lady herself in straitened circumstances. She had struck up I'm stumbling a lot today. She had struck up an unworthy liaison and had a child as a result. She was young and her prospects were poor, and she did not hesitate at the invitation to quit a deserted and ruinous mansion. And so the contract was made. By the way of some errand or other, in the greatest secrecy, Genji visited her. Though she had made the commitment, she had been having second thoughts. The honor of the visit quite removed her doubts. I shall do entirely as you wish. Since it was a propitious day, he sent her off immediately. You will think it selfish and unfeeling of me, I am sure, but I have read the special plans. Tell yourself that there is a precedent for not being sent off to a hard life in a strange land, and put up with it for a while. And he told her in details of her duties. Since she had been at court, he had occasionally had a glimpse of her. She was thinner now. Her once fine mansion was sadly neglected, and the plantings in the garden was rank and overgrown. How, he wondered, had she endured such a life? Suppose we call it off, he said jokingly, and keep you here. She was such a pretty young woman that he could not take his eyes off from her. She could not help thinking that, if it was all the same, she would prefer serving him from somewhat nearer at hand. I have not been so fortunate as to know you, but now I may say how sad it has been to part. And so perhaps I should go with you. She smiled. I do not trust regrets at so quick a farewell. The truth has to do with someone you wish to visit. It was nicely done. She left the city by carriage. He assigned as escort men whom he trusted implicitly and enjoined them to the strictest secrecy. He sent with her a sword for the little girl and other appropriate gifts and provisions in such quantities that the procession was in danger of falling behind schedule. His attentions to the newly appointed nurse could not have been more elaborate. He smiled to think what this first grandchild would mean to the old man, how busy and self-important he would be. No doubt it told of events in a former life, and the thought brought twinges of conscience that she meant so much to Genji himself. Over and over again, he told the nurse that he would not be quick to forgive lapses and oversights. One day this leaf of mine shall be her shelter, whose years shall be as the years of the angel's rock. They took a boat down the river and hurried onwards by horse. The old man was overjoyed, and there was no end to his odd gratitude. He made obeisance in the direction of the capital. At this evidence that the little girl was important to Genji, he began to feel rather in awe of her too. She had an unearthly, almost ominous sort of beauty to make the nurse see that the fuss and bother he had not to make the nurse see that the fuss and bother had not, after all been overdone. There had been something horrible about this sudden removal to the countryside, but now it was as if she were awakening from a nightmare and into the broad sunlight. She already adored the little girl. The Akashi lady had been in despair. She had decided as the months went by that life was without meaning. The evidence of Genji's good intentions was comforting. She bestirred herself to make the guests from the city feel welcome. The escort was in hurry to return. She set down something from her feelings in a letter to Genji, to which she added this poem. These leaves are much too narrow to offer protection. The blossom awaits those all-encompassing ones. Genji was astonished at himself that his daughter should be so much on his mind and that he should so long to see her. He had said little to Murasaki at the events at Akashi, but he feared that she might have the story from someone else, and that would seem to be the situation, he said, concluding to his account. Somehow everything has gone wrong. I don't have children where I really want them, and now there is a child in a very unlikely place, and it is a girl, and I could of course simply disown her, but that is the sort of thing that I do not seem capable of. I will bring her here one of these days and let you have a look at her. You are not to be jealous now. Murasaki flushed. How strange you are. You make me dislike myself, constantly assigning traits which are not mine at all. When and by whom, I wonder, shall I begin to have lessons in jealousy? Genji smiled, and tears came to his eyes. When indeed, pray, you are very odd, my dear. Things come into your mind that would not occur to anyone else. She thought of their longing for each other through the years of letters back and forth, and his delinquencies and her resentment seemed like a silly joke. There are very special reasons for it all, he continued, that she should be so much on my mind, and I should be so diligent in my inquiries, but I fear that it is too soon to tell you of them. You would not understand. I think that the setting may have been partly responsible. He had told her of the lines of smoke across the Akashi sky that last evening, and though with some understatement perhaps of the lady's appearance and of her skill on the koto, and so while she herself had been lost in the infinite sadness, thought Murasaki, he had managed to keep himself entertained. It did not seem right that he should have allowed himself even a playful glance at another woman. If he had his ways, she would have hers. She looked aside, whispering as if to herself, there was a time when we seemed rather a nicely matched couple. I think I shall be the first to rise and smoke, and it may not go the direction of the other. What an unpleasant thing to say! For whom in the mountains upon unfriendly seas has the flow of my tears been such as to sweep me under? I wish you could understand me, but of course it is not the way of this world that we are ever completely understood. I would not care nor complain except for the fact that I do so love you. He took out a koto and tuned it and pushed it towards her, but perhaps somewhat displeased at his account of the other lady's talent, she refused to touch it. She was a calmly, delightfully gentle lady, and these small outbursts of jealousy were interesting. These occasional shows of anger, charming. Yes, he thought, she was someone he could be with as always. His daughter would be 50 days old on the 5th of the 5th month. What? His daughter would be 50 days old on the 5th of the 5th month. He longed more than ever to see her. What a splendid affair of the 50th day celebrations would be if they might take place in the city. Why had he allowed the child to be born in so unseemly a place? If it had been a boy, he would not have been so concerned, but for a girl, it was a very great disability not to be born in the city, and she seemed especially important because his unhappiness had had so much to do with her destinies. He sent off messengers with the strictest orders to arrive on the day and no other. They took with them all the gifts which the most fertile imagination could have thought of for such an occasion, and practical everyday supplies as well. This was Genji's note. The seagrass, hidden among the rocks unchanging, competes this day for attention with the iris. I'm quite consumed with longing. You must be prepared to leave Akashi. It cannot be otherwise. I promise you that you have not the smallest thing to worry about. The old man's face was a twisted shell once more, this time most properly with joy. Very elaborate preparation had been made for the 50th day ceremonies, but had these convoys not come from Genji, they would have been like brocades worn in the night. The nurse had found the Akashi lady to her liking, a pleasant companion in a gloomy world. Among the women whom the lady's parents, through family connections, had brought from the city were several of no other lower standing from the nurse, but they were all aged, tottering people who could no longer be used in court and who had in effect chanced upon Akashi in their search for a retreat among the crags. The nurse was at her elegant best. She gave this and that account as her feminine sensibilities led her of the great world, and she spoke of Genji and how everyone admired him. The Akashi lady began to think herself important for having had something to do with the little memento he had left behind. The nurse saw Genji's letter. What extraordinary good fortune the lady did have, she had been thinking, and how unlucky she had been herself, and Genji's inquiries made her feel important too. The lady's reply was honest and unaffected. The crane is lost on an insignificant isle. Not even today do you come to seek it out. I cannot be sure how long life, darkened by lonely reveries and brightened by occasional messages from outside, can be expected to continue, and must beg of you that the child be freed of uncertainty the earliest day possible. Genji read the letter over and over again and sighed. The distant boat, more distant. Murasaki looked away as she spoke, as if to herself, and said no more. You do make a large thing of it. Myself, I make no more of it than this. Sometimes a picture of that sea coast come into my mind, and memories come back, and I sigh. You are very attentive, not to miss the sigh. He let her see only the address. The hand would have done honor to the proudest lady at court. She could see why the Akashi lady had done so well. It was said that his preoccupation with Murasaki had left him no time for the lady of the orange blossoms. There were public affairs as well, and he was now too important to wander about as he would wish. It seemed that all was quiet in the sector, and so he gave little thought to it. Then came the long rains of early summer, to lay a pall over things and bring a respite from his duties. He roused himself for a visit. Though she saw little of him, the lady was completely dependent on him, but she was not of the modern sort, given to outpourings of resentment. He knew that she would not make him uncomfortable. Long neglected, her house now wore a weirdly ruinous aspect. As usual, he first looked in on her sister, and late in the night moved on to the lady's own room. He was himself weirdly beautiful in this misty moonlight. She felt very inadequate, but she was waiting for him out near the veranda, in meditative contemplation of the night. Her refusal to let anything upset her was remarkable. From nearby came the metallic cry of the water rail. Did not this bird come knocking at my door? What cost would I have to admit the moon to these ruins? Her soft voice, trilling into silence, was very pleasing. He sighed, almost wishing it were not the case that each of his ladies had something to recommend her. It made for the most complicated life. You must respond to the call of every water rail. You must find yourself admitting peculiar moons. I am worried. Not of course that he really suspected her of indiscretion. She had not waited for him, and she was very dear to him. She reminded him of his farewell admonition not to look at the cloudy moon. And why, she said, gently as always, should I have thought then that I was unhappy? It is no better now. She made the usual points. One wondered that they came so effortlessly as she sought to comfort her. He had not forgotten the Kyushu Gosechi dancer. He would have liked to see her again, but the clandestine meeting was altogether too difficult to arrange. He dominated her thoughts so much that she turned away all the prospective bridegrooms who interested her father, and had decided that she would not marry. Genji's plan was that once his East Lodge had been redone, all cheerfully and pleasantly, he would gather just such ladies there, and should a child be born who required careful upbringing, ask them to take charge of it. The new house compared very well indeed with the old, for he had assigned officials of intelligence and good taste to the work of remodeling. He had not forgotten about Oborozukiyo. He let her know that the unfortunate event had still not stilled his ardor. She had learned her lesson, however, and so for Genji, an affair that had never been really successful had become a complete failure. Life was pleasant for the retired emperor who had taken up residence in the Suzaku Palace. He had parties and concerts as the seasons went by, and was in general good spirits. Various ladies were still with him. The mother of the crown prince was the exception. Not especially conspicuous among them, she had been no match for Oborozukiyo now that she had come into her own. She left the emperor's side to manage the crown prince's affairs. Genji now occupied his mother's room at the palace. The crown prince was in the pavilion in which adjoined them, and Genji was his companion and servant. Though Fujitsubo could not resume her former titles, she was given the emoluments of a retired emperor. She maintained a full household and pursued her religious vocation with solemn grandeur. Factional politics had been in recent years made it difficult for her to visit the palace, and she had grieved at not being able to see her son. Now everything was as she would have wished it, and the time had come for Kokiden to be unhappy with the world. Genji was unscrupulously attentive to Kokiden's needs. The fact did nothing to change her feelings towards him, which were the subject of unfriendly criticism. Prince Hyobu, Murasaki's father, had sought during the bad years to please the dominant faction. Genji had not forgotten. Genji's conduct was on the whole not vengeful, but he was sometimes openly unfriendly to the prince. Fujitsubo saw and was unhappy. The conduct of the public affairs were now divided between Genji and his father-in-law to pursue as they wish. The ceremonies when Tono Chujo's daughter entered the court in the 8th month were magnificent under the energetic direction of the chancellor himself. It was known that Prince Hyobu had been putting all his time and wealth into preparing his second daughter for court service. Genji made it clear that the girl was not to be so honored. And what was the prince to do? In the autumn, Genji made a pilgrimage to Sumiyoshi. It was a brilliant progress. In thanks for the granting of his prayers. By the merest chance, it came on the day the Akashi lady had chosen on her own pilgrimage, a semi-annual observance which this time had a special purpose, to apologize for her not being able to be present herself the year before, or earlier this year. She came by ship. As the ship pulled in, a gorgeous array of offerings were being laid out on the beach. The shrine precincts rang with the shouts of bearers, and there were uniformed dancers, all very good-looking. "And whose party it might be?" asked one of the men. The very inferior footman to whom the query was made laughed heartily. "You mean there is someone who does not know that Genji minister has come because of his vows?" The lady was stunned. To have chosen this day of all days to be among the distant onlookers. Sorry. Her own inferiority could not have been emphasized more painfully. She was, in spite of it, tied to him by some bond or another, and here were these underlings, completely pleased with themselves, reflecting his glory. Why, because of what crimes and sins should she, who never ceased thinking of him, have made this journey to Sumiyoshi on this day without catching an echo of it all? She could only turn away and try to hide her sorrows. Genji's attendants were numberless, their robes of deep hues and brilliant hues like maple leaves and cherry blossoms against the deep green of the pine groves. Among the courtiers of the sixth rank, the yellow-green of the Imperial Secretariat stood out. The man who had, on an earlier day, had bitter words for the sacred fans of Kamo was among them. Also, holding a guard's commission, he had an imposing retinue of his own. Yoshikiyo, too, was a guard's officer. He seemed especially proud of himself, and indeed his scarlet robe was very grand. All the men she had known at Akashi were scattered among the crowds. Almost unrecognizable in their finery, the picture of prosperity, the young courtiers had even sought to outdo one another in comparing their horses, and for the rustics from Akashi, it was a very fine show. For the lady, it was torment to see all this splendor and not to see Genji himself, like the Kawara minister. He had been granted a special honor guard of the page boys, 10 of them, all very pretty, of uniform height and resplendently decked out, the courts that bound up their hair in their page boy style, and most elegant blending from white to deep purple. Yugiri, whom Genji denied nothing, had put even his stable boys into livery. The Akashi lady felt as if she was gazing at a realm beyond the clouds. Her own child seemed so utterly insignificant. She bowed to the shrine and prayed more fervently. The governor of the province came to greet Genji, and no doubt the pass he had made ready was finer than for most ministers. The lady could bear no more. If I were to go up my miserable little offerings, the god would scarcely notice, and would not think I had done much by the way of my keeping my promises. But the whole trip would be pointless if we were to turn and go home. She suggested that they put in at Naniwa, and there were commission lustration ceremonies. Not dreaming what had happened, Genji passed the night in entertainments sure to please the gods. He went beyond all his promises in the novelty and ingenuity of the dancers. His nearest retainers, men like Koremitsu, knew how much the god had done for them. As Genji came unannounced from the shrine, Koremitsu handed him a poem. These pines of Sumiyoshi made me think of days when we were neighbors to this god. Very apt, thought Genji. Remembering those fearful winds and waves, am I to forget the gods of Sumiyoshi? Yes, it has, without a question, been through his intervention. There was solemn gratitude in the words. Genji was greatly upset when Koremitsu told him that a boat had come from Akashi and been turned away by the crowds on the beach. Again, the gods of Sumiyoshi seemed to be at work. The lady would surely regret having chosen this day. He must at least get off a note. Leaving Sumiyoshi, he made excursion to other famous places in the region and had grand and solemn lustrations performed on the 7 strands of Naniwa. The waves of Naniwa, he said to himself, though with no real thought one may imagine of throwing himself in, as he looked out over the buoys and marked the Horie channel. Koremitsu, who was among his mounted attendants, overheard. Always prepared for such an exigency, he took out a short writing brush and handed it to Genji. A most estimable servant, thought Genji. jotting down a poem on a sheet of paper he had at hand. Firm the bond that brings us to Naniwa, whose channel buoys invite me to throw myself in. Koremitsu sent in to the lady by the messenger who was familiar with the events of Akashi. He wept tears of joy at even so small a favor. A line of horsemen was just then passing by. This was her reply, to which she tied sacred cords on the lustration at Tamino. A lowly one whose place is not to demand. To what purpose at Naniwa should I cast myself in? It was evening, and the scene was a lovely one with the tide flooding in and cranes calling ceaselessly from the shallows. He longed to see her, whatever these crowds might think. My sleeves are wet as I wandered these shores. The isle of the raincoat does not fan off the dews. Hey, hi, King Komodo. King Komodo. Thank you for dropping by. To joyous music, he continued his round of the famous places. Sorry. To joyous music, he continued his rounds of the famous places, but his thoughts were with the Akashi lady. Women of pleasure were in evidence. It would seem there were susceptible young men, even among the highest ranks. Genji looked resolutely away. It was his view that one should be moved only by adequate forces, and that frivolous claims were to be rejected even in the most ordinary affairs. Their most seductive and studied poses had no effect upon him. His party moved on. The next day, being a propitious one, the Akashi lady made offerings at Sumiyoshi, and so, in keeping with her more modest station, acquitted herself of her vows. The incident had only served to intensify her gloom. A messenger came from Genji even before he could have returned to the city. He meant very shortly to send for her, he said. She was glad, and yet she hesitated, fearing the uncertainties of sailing off beyond the island to a place she could not call home. Her father too was uneasy, but life in Akashi would be even more difficult than in earlier years. Her reply was obedient but indecisive. I had forgotten. I had forgotten. A new high priestess had been appointed for the Ise shrine, and the Rokujo lady had returned to the city with her daughter. Genji's attentions, his inquiries as to her needs, were as always very thorough, but she remembered her coldness in the other years and had no wish to call back the old sorrows and regret. She would treat him as a distant friend, no more. For his part, she made no special effort to see her. The truth was that he could not be sure of his own feelings, and his station in life was now such that he could not pursue sundry love affairs as he once had. She had no heart for importuning the lady. He would have liked all the same to see what the years had done to her daughter, the high priestess. The Rokujo house had been kept in good repair. As always, she selected only ladies of the finest taste and endowments to be with her. And the house was once more a literary and artistic salon. Though her life was in many ways lonely, there were ample pleasures and distractions. Suddenly she fell ill, troubled by feelings of guilt that she had spent those years in Ise so remote from the good law. She became a nun. Genji cancelled all his appointments and rushed to her side. The old passion had departed, but she had been important to him. His commiserations were endless. She had had a place set out for him near her pillow. Raising herself to an armrest, she essayed her own answers. She seemed very weak, and he wept to think that she might die before he was able to let her know how fond he had been of her. It moved her deeply to think that now, when everything else seems to be going, he should still care. She spoke to him of her daughter. She will have no one to turn to when I am gone. Please do count her among those who are important to you. She has been the unluckiest of girls, my poor dear. I am a useless person and I have done her no good. But I tell myself that if my health will only hold out a little longer, I may look after her until she is better to look after herself. She was weeping, and life did indeed seem to be leaving her. You speak as if we might become strangers. It could not have happened. It would have been quite impossible even if you had not said this to me. I mean to do everything I can for her, and you must not worry. It is all so difficult. Even when a girl has a father to whom she can look with complete confidence, the worst thing is to lose her mother. Life can be so dreadfully complicated when her guardian is found to have thoughts not becoming a parent. Unfortunately, suspicions are surely to arise, and other women will see their chance to be ugly. These are distasteful forebodings, I know, but please do not let anything of the sort come into your relations with her. My life has been an object of lesson in uncertainty, and my only hope is now that she be spared it all. She need not be quite so outspoken, thought Genji. But he replied calmly enough. I am steadier and soberer a person than I used to be, and it astonishes me that you still think me a trifler. One of these days, the true state of affairs will be apparent even to you. It was dark outside her curtains, through which come suggestions of lamplight. Was it just possible? He slid forward and looked through an opening in the curtains. He saw her dimly, leaning against the armrest, so beautiful with her hair cut short that she wished he might ask someone to do her likeness. And the one beyond, the east of the bed curtain, would be the priestess. Her curtain frames had been pushed casually aside. She sat chin in hand in an attitude of utter despondency. Though he could not see her well, she seemed very beautiful. There was great dignity in the flow of her hair, down over her shoulders and in the shape of her head, and she could see that, for all the nobility, it was also a winsome and delicate sort of beauty. He felt certain stirring of the heart and remembered her mother's worries. I am feeling much worse, said the lady, and I fear that I may be guilty of rudeness if you stay longer. A woman helped her into bed. She had sensed that she was being seen. I must look like a witch. There is a very strong bond between us. It must be so that you should have come to me now. I have been able to tell you a little of what has been on my mind, and I am no longer afraid to die. It moves me deeply that you should have thought me worthy. I have many brothers, and I have never felt so close to them. My father looked upon the high priestess as one of his daughters, and to me she shall be a sister. I have no daughters of my own. She will feel an emptiness in my life. His inquiries were warm and frequent, but a week or so later she died. Aware all over again of the uncertainty of life, Genji gave orders for the funeral and went into retreat. The priestess's steward could have seen to them after a fashion, but he was her chief support. He paid a visit. She replied through a lady of honor that she was feeling utterly lost and helpless. Your mother spoke about you and left instructions, and it would be a great satisfaction if I might have your complete confidence. Her women found him such a source of strength and comfort that they thought he could be forgiven earlier derelictions. The services were very grand, with numerous people from Genji's house to help. Still in retreat, he sent frequently to inquire after her. When presently she had regained a measure of composure, she sent her own replies. She was far from easy about being in correspondence with him, but her nurse and others insisted that it would be rude to use an intermediary. It was a day of high winds and driving in the snow and sleet. He thought how much more miserable the weather must seem to her. "I can imagine," he wrote, "what these hostile skies must do to you, and yet, from skies of wild, unceasing snow and sleet, her spirit watches over a house of sorrow." He had chosen a paper of cloudy azure, and taken pains with all the details, which he thought might interest a young girl. She was hard put to reply, but her women again insisted that secretaries should have no part in these matters. She finally set down a poem on a richly perfumed grey paper, relying on the sombre texture to modulate the shadings of her ink. "I wish to go, but, blind with tears, am helpless, as snows which were not asked where they would fall." It was calm, reserved hand, not remarkably skilled, but with a pleasantly youthful quality about it, and much that told of good breeding. She had had a particular place in his thoughts ever since her departure for Ise, and now of course nothing stood in his way. But as before, he reconsidered. Her mother had had good reason for her fears, which worried him, lest, it must be added, that than the rumours that were even now going the rounds, he would behave in quite the opposite manner. He would be a model of propriety and parental solicitude, and when the emperor was a little older and better equipped to understand, he would bring her to court. With no daughters on hand to make life interesting, he would look after her as if she were his daughter. He was most attentive to her needs, and choosing occasions well, sometimes visited her. "You will think it very forward of me to say so, but I would like nothing better than to be thought a substitute for your mother. Every sign that you trust me will please me enormously." She was of a very shy and introspective nature, reluctant even to let him hear her voice. Her women were helpless to overcome this extreme reticence. She had in her service several minor princesses whose breeding and taste were such, he was sure, that she need not feel at all uncomfortable or awkward at court. He wanted very much to have a look at her and see whether his plans were well grounded, evidence, perhaps, that his fatherly impulses were not unmixed. He could not himself be sure when his feeling would change, and he let fall no hint of his plans. No hint of his plans. The princess's household felt greatly in his debt for his careful attention to the funeral and memorial services. The days went by in dark procession. Her retainers began to take their leave. Her house, near the lower eastern limits of the city, was in lonely district of the fields and temples, where the vesper bells often rang an accompaniment to her sobs. She and her mother had been close as parent and child seldom are. They had not been separated even briefly, and it had been without precedent for a mother to accompany a high priestess to Ise. She would have begged to be taken on this last journey as well, had it been possible. There were men of various ranks who sought to pay court through her women, quite as if he were her father. Genji told the women that none of them, not even the nurse, should presume to the matters into her own hands. They were very careful, for they would not want damaging reports to reach the ears of so grand a gentleman. The Suzaku Emperor still had vivid memories of the rites of the rites in the grand hall upon her departure for Ise, and of a beauty that had seemed almost frightening. "Have her come to me," he had said to her mother. "She shall live exactly like my sisters, the high priestess of Kamo and the others." But the Rokujo lady had misgivings and managed to evade the august invitation. The Suzaku emperor had already several well-born consorts, and her daughter would be without strong backing. He was not in good health, moreover, and she feared that to her own misfortune might be added her daughter's. With the Rokujo lady gone, the priestess women were more acutely aware that than ever of the need of the strong backing. The Suzaku emperor repeated his invitations. Genji learned of his brother's hopes. It would be altogether too high-handed to spirit the princess away, and on the other hand, Genji would have strong regrets at letting such a beautiful lady go. He decided that he must consult Fujitsubo, the mother of the new emperor. He told her of all that was troubling him. Her mother was careful, thoughtful lady. Malu's ways were responsible for all the trouble. I cannot tell you how it hurts me to think that she came to hate me. She died hating me. But as she lay dying, she spoke to me about her daughter. Enough had been said about me. I gathered to convince her that I was the one to turn to, and so she controlled her anger and confided in me. The thought of it makes me want to start weeping again. I would find it difficult to ignore such a sad case even if it were not for my personal concern. And I want to do all I can to put the poor lady's soul at rest and persuade her to forgive me. His Majesty is mature for his age, but he is still very young, and I often think how good it would be if he had someone with him who knew a little about the world. But of course, the decision must be yours. This is very thoughtful and understanding of you. One does not wish to be unkind to the Suzaku Emperor, of course, but perhaps, taking advantage of the Rokujo's lady's instructions, you could pretend to be unaware of his wishes. He seems in any case to have given himself over to his prayers, and such concerns can scarcely matter very much anymore. I am sure that if you explain the situation to him, he will not harbor any deep resentment. If you agree, then are kind enough to number her among the acceptable candidates, I shall say a word to her of your decision. I have thought a great deal about her interests and have at length come to the conclusion I have just described to you. The gossips do upset me, of course. He would do as she suggested. Pretending to be unaware of the Suzaku's emperor's hopes, he would take the girl into Nijo Mansion. He told Murasaki of this decision, and, he added, she is just the right age to be a good companion. She was delighted. He pushed ahead with his plans. Fujitsubo was concerned about her brother, Prince Hyobu, who was in fever. It seemed that to have his own daughter received... It seemed... Wait, this sentence, so many commas, hang on. Fujitsubo was concerned about her brother, Prince Hyobu, who was in fever, it seemed, to have his own daughter received at court. He and Genji were not on good terms. What did Genji propose to do in the matter? Tono Chujo's daughter, now a royal consort, occupied the Kokiden's apartments and made a good playmate for the emperor. She had been adopted by the grandfather, the chancellor, who denied her nothing. Prince Hyobu's daughter, was about the same age as the emperor, and Fujitsubo feared that they would make a rather ridiculous couple, as if they were playing house together. She was delighted at the prospect of having an older lady with him, and she said as much. Genji was untiring in his services, advising him in public matters, of course, to the great satisfaction of Fujitsubo, and managing his private life as well. Fujitsubo was ill much of the time. Even when she was at the palace, she found it difficult to be with her son as much as she wished. It was quite imperative that he have an older lady to look after him. That was chapter 11. Miraculously, I think, I don't know why, but there's no construction sound today. I'm very happy. Okay. Chapter 12 is the ending of this version. I think the real version is that there should be like over like 54 chapters. No, 40? Yeah. There's like a lot of chapters, but because this is the abridged version, and also touted as one of the best translated and abridged version of the Tale of Genji in English, and I think we should have a pretty good ending. Also, I forgot, I was talking about how I might read something later, right? I can read Murasaki Shikibu's diary actually. Let me go get it and see how many pages it is. Oh, it's very long. It's way too long. I'll do another day of reading for it. Like the pages are little, but the fonts are very very small. The fonts are like superbly small, so I don't think I can finish reading it today. That's crazy. The foreword is like so long. I don't know. Can I? Nah, I think it's better if I read it another day. Okay, 1 second. Quick break. Back. Okay. Yeah. Alright. Let's finish up Tale of Genji. Let's go. Alright. Today, we are ending the Tale of Genji by Murasaki Shikibu. Chapter 12, a picture contest. Sorry. Chapter 12, a picture contest. Fujitsubo was most eager that Akikonomu, the former high priestess of Ise, be received at court. Genji knew that Akikonomu had no strong and reliable backer, but not wanting to alienate the Suzaku Emperor, had decided not to bring her to Nijo. Making every effort to appear withdrawn and impartial, he took general responsibility for the proceedings and stood in the place of the girl's father. The Suzaku Emperor knew, of course, that it would not do to write to her at of his disappointment. On the day of her presentation at court, he sent magnificent robes and other gifts as well, wonderfully wrought cases and vanity chests, and incense coffers, and incomparable incenses and sachets, so remarkable that they could be detected even beyond the legendary 100 paces. It may have been that very special occasion. It may have been that the very special attention he gave his gifts had to do with the fact that Genji would see them. Akikonomu's lady of honor showed them to Genji. He took up a comb box of the most remarkable workmanship and endlessly fascinating in its detail. Among the rosettes on the box of decorative combs was a poem in the Suzaku Emperor's own hand. I gave you combs and sent you far away. The god now sends me far away from you. Genji almost felt as if he were guilty of sacrilege and blasphemy. From his own way of letting his emotion run wild, he could imagine Suzaku's feeling when the priestess had departed for Ise, and his disappointment when, after years of waiting, she had returned to the city and everything had seemed to be in order, and these new obstacles had intervened. Would bitterness and resentment mar the serenity of his retirement? Genji knew that he himself would have been very much upset indeed, and it was he who had brought Akikonomu to the new emperor at the cost of hurting the retired emperor. There had been a time, of course, when he had felt bitter and angry at Suzaku, but he had known through it all that his brother was of a gentle and sensitive nature. He sat lost in his thoughts. And how does she mean to answer? Have there been other letters? What have they said? But the lady of honor showed no disposition to let him see them. Akikonomu was not feeling very well and would have preferred not to answer. But you must, my lady. Genji could hear the discussion through the blinds and curtains. You know that you owe him a little respect. They are quite right, said Genji. It will not do at all. You must let him have something, if only a line or two. Though the inclination not to answer was very strong, Akikonomu remembered her departure for Ise. Gently, softly, and handsome, the emperor had wept that she must leave. Though only a child, she had been deeply touched, and she remembered her dead mother then and on other occasions. This, and only this, was the poem that she finally set down. Long ago, one word you said, away. Sorry now am I that I paid no heed. She rewarded Suzaku's messengers lavishly. Genji would have liked to see her reply, but could hardly say so. He was genuinely troubled. Suzaku was so handsome a man that one could imagine falling in love with him were he a woman, and Akikonomu was by no means an ill match for him. Indeed, they would have been a perfect couple, and the present emperor was still a boy. Genji wondered whether Akikonomu herself might not feel uneasy at so incongruous a match, but it was too late now to halt the proceedings. He gave careful instructions to the superintendent of the palace repairs. Not wishing the Suzaku Emperor to think that he was managing the girl's affairs, he paid only a brief courtesy call upon her arrival at court. She had always been surrounded by gifted and accomplished women, and now that the ones who had gone home were back with her, he had easily the finest retinue at court. Genji thought of the Rokujo lady, her dead mother. With what feelings of pride would she now be overseeing her daughter's affair? He would have thought her death a great loss even if he had not loved her. She had had few rivals, her taste had been genuinely superior, and she was much in his thoughts these days. Fujitsubo was also at court. The emperor had heard that a fine new lady had arrived, and his eagerness was most charming. "Yes, she is splendid," said his mother. "You must be on your best behavior when you meet her." He feared that a lady of such advanced years might not be easy to talk to. It was late in the night when she made her appearance. She was small and delicately molded, and she seemed quiet and very much in control of herself, and in general made a very good impression on the emperor. His favorite companion was Tono Chujo's little daughter, who accompanied who occupied the Kokiden's apartments. The new arrival, so calm and self-possessed, did make him feel on the defensive. And then Genji behaved towards her with such solemnity that the emperor was lured into rather solemn divorce. Though he distributed his nights impartially between the two ladies, he preferred the Kokiden apartments for diurnal amusements. Tono Chujo had ambitious plans for his daughter and was worried about his new competitor. The Suzaku Emperor had difficulty resigning himself to what had happened. Genji came calling one day, and they had a long and affectionate call. The Suzaku Emperor, who had more than once spoken to Genji of the priestess's departure for Ise, mentioned it again, though somewhat circumspectly. Genji gave no open indication that he knew what had happened, but he did discuss it in a manner with which he hoped would elicit further remarks from his brother. It was clear that the Suzaku Emperor had not ceased to love the girl, and Genji was very sorry for him indeed. He knew and regretted that he could not see for himself the beauty with which seemed to have such a powerful effect upon everyone who did see it. Akiko no Mu permitted not the brightest glimpse, and so, of course, he was fascinated. He saw enough to convince him that she must be very near perfection. The emperor had two ladies, and there was no room for the third. Prince Hyobu's plan for sending his daughter to court had floundered. He could only hope that the emperor grew older. As the emperor grew older, he would be in a more receptive mode. The competition between the two ladies was warm. The emperor loved art more than anything else. He loved to look at paintings, and he painted beautifully. Akiko no Mu was also an accomplished artist. He went more and more frequently to her apartments when the two of them would paint for each other. His favorite among the young courtiers were painters and students of painting. It delighted him to watch this new lady, so beautiful and so elegant, casually sketching a scene, now and again pulling back to think the matter over. He liked her very much. He liked her much better now. Tono Chujo kept himself well informed. A man of affairs who had strong competitive instincts was now determined not to lose his competition. He assembled master painters and told them exactly what he wanted and gave them the best materials to work with. And of the opinion of the illustration for the works of established authors could always be counted on. He chose his favorites and set his painters to illustrating them. He also commissioned paintings of the season and showed considerable flair with captions. The emperor liked them all The emperor liked them all and wanted to share his pleasure with Akiko no Mu, but Tono Chujo objected. The paintings were not to leave the Kokiden apartments. Genji smiled. He was that way when he was a boy, and in many ways he is still a boy. I do not think it's a very deft way to manage His Majesty. I will send off my whole collection and let him do with it as he pleases. All the chests and bookcases at Nijo were ransacked for old paintings and new, and Genji and Murasaki sorted out the ones that best suited current fancies. There were interesting and moving pictures of those sad Chinese ladies Yang Guifei and Wang Chaochun. Genji feared, however, that subjects were inauspicious. Thinking this a good occasion to show them to Murasaki, he took out the sketchbooks and journals of his exile. Any moderately sensitive lady would have found tears coming to her eyes. For Murasaki, those days had been unrelieved pain, not easily forgotten. Why, she asked, had he not let her see them before? Better to see these strands where the fishermen dwell than far away to weep all alone. I think the uncertainty might have been less cruel. It was true. Now more than in those paintings, Now more than in those painful days I weep, as tracings of them brings them back to me. He must let Fujitsubo see them, choosing the more presentable scrolls, the ones in which life upon those shores came forward most vividly. He found his thoughts returning to Akashi. Hearing Genji's activities, Tono Chujo redoubled his own efforts. He quite outdid himself with all the accessories, spindles and mountings and cords and the like. It was now the middle of the 3rd month, a time of soft, delicious air, when everyone somehow seemed happy and at peace. It was also a quiet time at court, when people had leisure for these evocations. Tono Chujo saw a chance to bring the young emperor to new raptures. He would offer his collections for the royal review. Both in Kokiden apartments and in Akikonomu's plum pavilion, there were paintings in endless variety. Illustrations for old romances seems to interest both painter and viewer. Akikonomu rather preferred secure and established classics, while the Kokiden girl chose the romances that were rage of the day. To the casual observer, it might have seemed perhaps that her collection was the brighter and more stylish. Connoisseurs among the court ladies had made the appraisal of art their principal work. Fujitsubo was among them. She had had no trouble giving up the most pleasures, but a fondness of art had refused to be shaken off. Listening to the aesthetic debates, he hit upon the idea. The ladies must divide into two sides. On the left, thank you for the follow. On the left was the Plum Pavilion and Akikonomu faction, led by Heinai Shinosuke, Jiju no Naishi, and Shosho no Myobu, and in the right the Kokiden faction, Daini no Naishinosuke, Chujo no Myobu, and Hyoe no Myobu. Fujitsubo listened with great interest as each gave forth with her opinions. They were, all of them, gifted students of art. Thank you to ST Sina for the follow. The first match was between an illustration for the bamboo cutter. Thank you. Unfortunately, we are on the last chapter already. we are actually finishing the book. Thank you. But I do have previous VODs available on Twitch and my YouTube. I don't know which version of translation that you are reading, but I'm reading the one that is translated and abridged by Edward G. Seidensticker. It's considered as one of the best abridged translated version of Tale of Genji. Yeah, and I quite enjoy it so far. We are almost at the end now. Yeah, we only have a few more pages to go. But thank you so much for the follow, and thank you so much for the interest. Let us continue. I'll chat with you a little bit more about this when we finish, okay? The first match was between an illustration for the bamboo cutter, the ancestors of all romances, a scene centering upon Toshikage from the Tale of the Hollow Tree. From the left came this view. The story has been with us for a very long time, as familiar as the bamboo growing before us, joint upon joint. There is not much in it that is likely to take us by surprise, yet the Moon Princess did avoid sullying herself with affairs of this world, and her proud fate took her back to the far heavens, and so perhaps we must accept something august and godly in it, far beyond the reach of silly, superficial women. And this from the right. It may be, as you say, that she returned to a realm beyond our sight, and so beyond our understanding. But this too must be said, that in our world she lived in a stalk of bamboo, which fact suggests rather dubious lineage. She exuded a radiance, we are told, which flooded her stepfather's house with light. But what is that light which suffuses these many fenced halls and pavilions? Lord Abe threw away 1,000 pieces of gold and another 1,000 in a desperate attempt to purchase the fire rat's skin, and in an instant it was up in flames. A rather disappointing conclusion. Nor it is very edifying, really, that the Princess Kuramochi, who should have known how well informed the princess was in these matters, should have forged a jewel branch and so made himself a forgery too. The bamboo cutter illustration by Kose no Omi with a caption by Ki no Tsurayuki was mounted on a Chinese silk and had a cherries cover and spindle of sandalwood, rather uninteresting all in all. Now, let us look at the other. Toshikage was battered by tempests and waves and swept off the foreign parts, but he had finally come home, whence his musical activities sent his fame back across the waters, and down through the centuries. This painting successfully blends the Chinese and Japanese and the new and the old, and I say that it is without rival. On stiff white paper with blue mounting and spindle of yellow jade, it was work of Tsunenori, and it was the work of Tsunenori and bore a caption by Michikaze. The effect was dazzlingly modern. The left had to admit defeat. The tales of Ise was pitted against the tale of Josami. No decision was forthcoming. The picture offered by the right was again a bright, lively painting of contemporary life with much, including details of the palace itself, to recommend it. Shall we forget how deep is the sea of Ise? Because the waves have washed away all tracks. It was Heinai Shinosuke pleading the cause of the left, though without great fire or eloquence. Are the grand accomplishment of Lord Narihira be dwarfed by a little love story done with a certain cleverness and plausibility? To this Josami, high above august clouds, the 1,000-fathom seas seem very shallow. It was Daini speaking for the right. Fujitsubo offered an opinion. However one may admire the proud spirit of the Lady Hyoe, one certainly would not wish to malign Lord Narihira. At first, the strands of the sea grass may seem old, but the fisherfolk of Ise are with us yet. And so, poem answered poem in endless feminine dispute. The younger and less practiced women hung upon the debate as if for their very lives, but security precautions had been elaborate, and even the grand ladies were permitted to see only the smallest part of the riches. Genji stopped by and was much diverted. If it was all the same, he said, why not make the final judgments in the emperor's presence? He had had a royal inspection in mind and from the start, and so had taken very great pains with his selections, which included a scroll of his own Suma and of his Akashi paintings. Nor was to Tono Chujo to be given low marks for efforts. The chief business at court these days had become the collecting of evocative paintings. I think it spoils the fun to have them painted specially, said Genji. I think we should limit ourselves to the ones we have had all along. He was, of course, referring to Tono Chujo and his secret studio. The Suzaku Emperor heard this stir and gave Akiko no Mu paintings of his own, among them representations of court festivals for which the Emperor Daigo had done the captions, and on a scroll depicting events from his own reign was the scene, for him unforgettable, of Akiko no Mu's departure for Ise. He himself had carefully gone over the sketches, and the finished painting by Kose no Kimochi quite lived up to his hopes. It was in a box, completely modern, of pierced aloes wood, with rosettes that quietly enhanced his beauty. He sent verbal message through a guard's captain on special assignment to Suzaku, setting down only this verse, beside a painting of the solemn arrival of at the Grand Hall. Though now I dwell beyond the sacred confines, though now I dwell beyond the sacred confines, my heart is there committing you to the gods. It required an answer. Bending a corner of one of the sacred combs, she tied a poem to it and wrapped it in azure Chinese paper. Within these sacred precincts all has changed. Fondly I think of the days when I served the gods. She rewarded the messenger very elegantly. The Suzaku Emperor was deeply moved and longed to return to his days on the throne. He was annoyed at Genji, who perhaps was now having a gentle sort of revenge. It would have seemed that the Suzaku Emperor sent large numbers of pictures, though through his mother, to the Kokiden lady. Oboro Zukiyo and another fancier of paintings had also put together a distinguished collection. The day was appointed. The careful casualness of all details would have done justice to far more leisurely preparations. The royal seats was put out in the ladies' withdrawing rooms, and the ladies were ranged to the north and south. The seats of the courtiers faced them on the west. The paintings on the left were in boxes of red sandalwood on sappanwoods, stands on flaring legs. Purple Chinese brocades were spread under the stands, which were covered with delicate lavender Chinese embroidery. 6 little girls sat behind them, their robes of red and their jackets of white lined with red, from under which peeped red and lavender. As for the right or Kokiden side, the boxes were heavy aloes and stands of lighter aloes. Green Korean brocades covered the stands, and the streamers and flaring legs were all in the latest style. The little page girls wore green robes and over them white jackets with green linings. Their singlets were of a green lined with yellow. Most solemnly they lined up their treasures. The emperor's own women were in the uniforms of the two sides. Genji and Tono Chujo were present upon royal invitations. Prince Hotaru, a man of taste and cultivation, and especially a connoisseur of painting, had taken an inconspicuous place among the courtiers. Perhaps Genji had suggested inviting him. It was the emperor's wish that he act as umpire. He found it almost impossible to hand down decision. All masters had painted cycles of all the four seasons with uncommon power, fluency and grace, and rather wonderful sense of unity, but they sometimes seemed to run out of space, so that the observer was left to imagine the grandeur of nature for himself. Sometime of the more superficial pictures of our own day, their telling points in the dexterity and ingenuity of the strokes, and in certain impressionism, did not seem markedly their inferior, and sometimes it indeed seemed ahead of them in brightness and good spirits. Several interesting points were made in favor of both. The doors to the breakfast suite, the door to the breakfast suite, north of the ladies' withdrawing rooms, had been slit open so that Fujitsubo might observe the proceedings. Having long admired her taste in painting, Genji was hoping that she might be persuaded to give her views, when though infrequently, he was not entirely satisfied with something Prince Hotaru said and offered an opinion of his own. He had a way of sweeping everything before him. Evening came, and still Prince Hotaru had not reached a final decision. As its very last offering, Akiko no Muside brought out a scroll depicting life at Suma. Tono Chujo was startled, knowing that the final inning had come. The Kokiden faction too brought out a very remarkable scroll, but there was no describing the sure delicacy with which Genji had quietly set down the moods of those years. The assembly, Prince Hotaru and the rest, fell silent, trying to hold back tears. They had pitied him, and thought of themselves as suffering with him, and now they saw how it really had been. They had before their eyes the bleakness of those nameless strands and inlets, here and there not so much open description as poetic impressions, were captions in cursives, Chinese and Japanese. There was no point now in turning to the painting offered by the right. The Suma scroll had blocked everything else from his view. The triumph of the left was complete. Dawn approached, and Genji was vaguely melancholy. As the wine flagons went the rounds, he fell into reminiscence. I worked very hard at my Chinese studies when I was a boy, so that father seemed to fear I might become a scholar. He thought it might be because scholarship seldom attracts wide acclaim, he said. That he had rarely seen it succeed in combining happiness with long life. In any event, he thought it rather pointless in my case, because people would notice me whether I knew anything or not. He himself undertook to tutor me in pursuits not related to the classics. I don't suppose I would have been called remarkably inept in any of them, but I did not really excel in any of them either. But there was painting. I was the merest dabbler, and yet there were times when I felt a strange urge to do something really good. Then came my years in the provinces and leisure to examine the remarkable sea coast. All that was wanting was the power to express what I saw and felt, and that is why I have kept my inadequate efforts from you until now. I wonder, he said, turning to Prince Hotaru, if my presuming to bring them out might set some sort of precedent for impertinence and conceit. It is true of every art, said the prince, that real mastery requires concentrated effort, and it is true, too, that in every art worth mastering, though of course the word mastering contains all manner of degrees and stages, the evidence of efforts are apparent in the results. There are two mysterious exceptions, paintings and the game of Go, in which natural ability seems to be the only thing that really counts. Modest ability can of course be put to modest use, A rather ordinary person who has neither worked nor studied so very hard can paint a decent picture or play a decent game of Go. Sometimes the best families will suddenly produce someone who seemed to do everything well. He was now speaking to Genji. Father was tutor for all of us, but I thought he took himself seriously only when you were his pupil. There were poetry, of course, and there were music, the flute and the koto. Painting seems less study than play, something you let your brush have its way with when poetry had worn you out. And now see the results. See all of our professionals running off and hiding their faces. The prince may have been in his cups. In any event, the thought of the old emperor brought a new flood of tears. A quarter moon having risen, the western sky was silver. Musical instruments were ordered from the royal collection. Tono Chujo chose a Japanese koto. Genji was generally thought the finest musician in the court, but Tono Chujo was well above the ordinary. Genji chose a Chinese koto, as did Prince Hotaru, and Shosho no Myobu took up a lute. Courtiers with good sense of rhythm were set to marking time, and all in all, it was a very good concert indeed. Faces and flowers emerged dimly in the morning twilight, and birds were singing in the clear sky. Gifts were brought from Fujitsubo's apartments. The emperor himself bestowed a robe on Prince Hotaru. Examination and criticism of Genji's journals had become the main business of the court. He asked that his paintings of the seacoast be given to Fujitsubo. She longed to see what went before and came after, but he said only that he would in due course show her everything. The pleasure in which he had given the emperor was pleasure for Genji himself. It worried Tono Chujo that Genji should so favor Akiko no Mu. Was a triumph to be complete. He comforted himself with the thought that the emperor would not have forgotten his own early partiality for the Kokiden girl. Surely she would not be cast aside. Genji had a strong sense of history and wanted this to be one of the ages when things began. Very great care therefore went into all the fates and observances. It was an exciting time, but he was also obsessed with the evanescence. He was determined to withdraw from the public affairs when the emperor was a little older. Every precedent told him that men who rise to rank and power beyond their years cannot expect to live a long life. Now, in this benign reign, perhaps by way of compensation of the years of sorrow and disgrace, Genji had an abundance, indeed, a plethora of rank and honor. Further glory could only bring uncertainty. He wanted to withdraw quietly and make preparations for the next life, and so add to his years in this one. Can I repeat that? I'm gonna repeat that. He wanted to withdraw quietly and make preparations for his next life, and so add to his years in this one. He had purchased a quiet tract off in a mountain village and was putting up a chapel and collecting images and scriptures. But first, he must see that no mistake was made in educating his children. So, it was that his intentions remained in some doubt. That is the end of the Tale of Genji. This is the Vintage Classics version, translated and abridged by Edward G. Seidensticker in 1976. Yep. Thank you. Thank you. I have read a bit of the story on Wiki, because it's like an open ending, right? You don't really know what's gonna happen to him after this. But yeah, I recommend you guys to go and read Wikipedia and see what's the true ending of it. But as far as I know, there is no true ending to the tale of Genji. Um, it's basically just end very abruptly. So to several translators, they think that Murasaki Shikibu wanted to end it abruptly like that, but to Edward Seidensticker, who did this vintage classics version, um, he thinks that she just wants to write until she dies. So basically, the probability of her passing away while writing the novel continuously is quite high, and I think I quite agree with him, because there's just no set um, ending to the book in whatever translation that they did, basically.